This is a Republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
Welcome to the Party Like It's 2020 episode of A Republic, if you can keep it. We're recording the morning after that delusional rant from Donald Trump last night about the issue that is his singular fixation. Imaginary election fraud 6 years ago, but really it's about 2026.
Well, I might have to dispute the whole singular fixation. He has a lot of weird fixations. You got the reflecting pool. You've got the B in dumb. I mean, you know, but I get it. Anyway, this is Jeff Timmer. The speech comes during a week of bad news for the madman in the Oval Office. Iran continues to dog-walk Trump and make the U.S. a laughingstock for the world, while the idiotic war continues to drive prices for American voters higher and higher. Trump was finally forced to pay millions of dollars in damages to a woman he sexually assaulted, and once upon a time, this would have been major news. His nominees for Attorney General and Director of National Intelligence embarrass themselves in Senate confirmation hearings and threaten our national security and the rule of law if confirmed. And the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. continues to be a perfect metaphor for Trump's presidency. His lack of self-awareness, delusional hubris, meeting the real-world reality of his total incompetence and stupidity. Hey, did anyone know that dumb has a B in it?
Trump and the Republicans have settled in on the messaging Jeff and I predicted here on the podcast several weeks ago. Manufactured culture wars and racial scare tactics about violent crime, but with an unexpected twist. Communism. That's right. It's Red Scare 3.0 for the Republicans as they look to spend the rest of 2026 campaigning like it's 1956.
Trump's speech last night about the 2020 election is both idiotic and alarming at the same time. Voters are locked in on the cost of living, while Trump, his administration, and all the Republicans are locked in and using the fictional tropes about the 2020 election being rigged to deliberately rig the 2026 election. We should be far more alarmed than we are about the prospect of a free and fair election this November.
And of course, the political eyes of the nation are focused on Michigan's race for the U.S. Senate, where there was also a significant new endorsement this week. Senator Gary Peters, whose retirement launched the battle for the nomination, reversed his earlier neutrality and has decided to back Haley Stevens, saying the Senate isn't the place for on-the-job training. And just again, Jeff and I have always said, can't look at a single poll, but we are going to mention the latest Detroit News polling from well-respected pollster Rich Zuba, who's been a guest on our program, shows Stevens now with a lead over Abdul El-Sayed, and the Democratic voters are focused on two issues, the economy and fighting Trump. But again, listeners, don't pay attention to one poll. Get out there and vote, and we'll see what happens on Election Day.
And this week we saw the latest federal fundraising reports from candidates and PACs across the country. And newsflash, money still matters more than the terminally online chatter that surrounds campaigns. And Democrats overall continue to outperform Republicans here in Michigan and across the country in the preponderance of important races. Democratic candidates for Senate and Congress are racking up massive hauls, while the Republicans they're not being complete slouches, at least with their fundraising, but they do lag in most key races. But Mark, let's go back and talk about this speech last night, what it was and what it wasn't, and what it portends.
Right, Jeff. First, again, neither of you or I or anybody else want to give any credence to anything, but I think I do want to spend a little bit of time here rebutting the specific Michigan reference that he made last night. He claimed that there's this massive fraud arising out of an incident in Muskegon in 2020. Here are the facts. It was a small organization that was doing voter registration work, and some of their workers filled in forms in the name of people who didn't actually register. This organization had nothing to do with the Democratic Party. They were caught. They were punished. No one voted illegally. So what Trump has done here is, again, as he's always done, is blow something completely out of proportion And where we're going with this, as Jeff has so presciently mentioned several times on this program, this is all to lay a foundation for 2026. He keeps going back to 2020 because he's so fixated on the fact that he lost legitimately. But all this is about trying to lay the foundation for interference in the 26 elections, send monitors in, try to take over elections from our federal perspective. But it's about 2026. Would you agree, Jeff?
Absolutely. This is a coordinated, deliberate, strategic effort to try to undermine not only the faith in the elections. I mean, that has been going on since the summer of 2020. Trump has the attention span of a gnat, except when it comes to securing his power and wealth. He's fixated on those two things. And so what they're doing now is the Republicans, like in Michigan, for example, are taking aim directly at Jocelyn Benson and what she did in 2020, or in Arizona, where Katie Hobbs, the governor now running for re-election, who was the Secretary of State during the 2020 election, trying to shine a spotlight on her and smear her in her re-election campaign. And this is all, this is so far beyond what would be considered normal politics. I'm certainly not Pollyannish, and I know you aren't either, about politics and getting in and becoming a knife fight in close races as candidates tussle. But this is not that. This is what started off as a talking point to try to discredit or assuage Trump's ego after he lost to Joe Biden in 2020, and kind of going through the stages of grief in that election, and in some of the close states going through recounts and having lawsuits rejected and recounts not changing anything. 63 lawsuits, numerous recounts, hand recounts in states in Georgia and Arizona. I mean, the list goes on, and it started off as Trump being genetically incapable of admitting loss, but now he's said the bullshit so many times it's become fact in his mind. And what's worse, it's become fact in the mind of 73% of Republican voters think that the 2020 election was rigged. And you hear these constant right-wing commentators, Caroline Leavitt from the White House press office, saying, we need to address this concern that millions of voters have. It's like, why do they have the concern, Caroline? Let's talk about why they have the concern. The arsonist set the fire. And surprise, people are concerned that there's a fire. In this case, I mean, it's all illusionary. There isn't. It's all. This is the power of propaganda, and the Department of National Intelligence, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and now this morning, Homeland Security, Mark Wayne Mullen, the dumbest man aside from Donald Trump and Tommy Tuberville in Washington, is talking about. They're opening up they're going to be using the power of Homeland Security, which I don't know what that power is. I assume it's kind of a sweeping federal power to start to investigate and prosecute people from the 2020 election. Trump is far more concerned about turning the power of the American government on the people, the American people, be it the National Guard or actual active duty military or the FBI or the ICE stormtroopers summarily executing 4 Americans now so far this year. Oh, it's only 4. That's, less than 1 per month. Gee, isn't that great? We should be very, very concerned about what this means for 2026 and for 2028. Donald Trump ran in 2024 for one reason, and that was to stay out of prison. And he that hasn't gone away. And in fact, he's probably been committing crimes at a greater rate during this term than he did in the last one, which was astounding. We're going to ultimately be stunned by. We think we know the depths of the grift and corruption and all the illegalities, and I think ultimately we're going to be stunned even at how much we don't know yet. And that Trump is not acting like somebody who is planning on giving up power. The Republicans in Congress and the Senate are not acting like they're facing the wrath of the voters that is coming their way in November with any real fear, because they plan to put their thumbs on the scale up to election day as people start to vote absentee and early voting on election day and after election day. Winning on election day no longer matters if they can cast spoil ballots in Michigan or Arizona or Georgia or New York or California. The chain of custody on absentee ballots, for instance, in the city of Detroit, if they send in a bunch of federal troops right before Election Day, leaving states with election results that are up in the air. How do we figure this out? They want to create this vacuum of chaos that they can use authoritarian powers to step in and fill. And that's what, to anybody who says that that's hyperbolic or overreaction, every time that accusation has been made during the last 11 years, not only have me or anybody who's made the prediction that believe the worst possible outcome from whatever Donald Trump is doing, the worst case scenario not only turns out to be true, it often turns out to be even worse than we can imagine. And that's what we have to prepare for.
No, you're absolutely right, Jeff. I want to give our listeners, some background facts here in terms of, the bigger picture here. Ever since the 2020 election in Michigan, after we adopted the amendment in 2018 on voting rights, we've done random audits in this state after every general election. They have all validated the election results. There have been recounts during that time, all of which have validated the election results. You mentioned lawsuits. A number of those lawsuits were brought in Michigan. They all failed to change any of those election results because they were meritless. And, in the end, our elections here in Michigan, there are 1,600 election professionals from the Secretary of State on down to clerks and at the local level, and then thousands of workers. And these are bipartisan folks. There are Democrats and Republicans in every precinct watching all of this. And the boards of canvassers are bipartisan. So we have a tremendous system here that ensures that these elections are conducted with integrity. So in the face of all of that, Trump is desperate to come up with mechanisms, means that he can put the federal government to use. He's now 0-15 in these lawsuits trying to get voter files, including a significant loss in Michigan that we talked about before. He's lost lawsuits to try to get control through the Postal Service of our absentee balloting system. He's lost lawsuits trying to use other federal agencies to change voter registration mechanisms. So what we saw last night is part of this overall effort, as you've indicated, this overall scheme to do everything he can. And now Mark Wayne Mullen has joined in this morning, and I'm sure we'll see other federal agencies as well. They're trying to find any possible tool in the federal government that they can use to interfere and put their finger, more than their finger, on the scale in terms of this fall's elections. We've successfully resisted it so far, but we cannot rest because Trump is not going to rest. We're going to see a lot more ranting and raving and craziness out of his government in addition to what we saw last night.
And in that hour, sir, you gave your word.
More on a republic if you can keep it after these messages.
And I have no choice but to.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we're here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
As we mentioned at the top, the political focus is on Michigan and the Democratic battle for the U.S. Senate nomination. Joining the conversation is someone watching especially closely, online political guru Jack Cacciarella. His YouTube political updates are seen by more than 1.5 million subscribers and more than 2 million followers across various social media platforms.
I first came to know Jack while he interned for the Lincoln Project during 2020 while he was still in high school. Now, after a political science path through Columbia University, he positions himself at the intersection of media virality and civic engagement, highlighting how today's platforms shape electoral conversation. His commentary covers everything from algorithmic media dynamics to youth voter mobilization, and his channels regularly break down political stories, offering context, critique, and a call to action. It's a pleasure to welcome my friend Jack Cacciarella to A Republic If You Can Keep It. Jack, it is wonderful to have you here on A Republic If You Can Keep It. I see you all over social media clips, and, you've got a lot to say. You've been really plugged in and tuned in. Tell us, what you see right now happening in kind of, let's start with a 30,000 foot view of where you see the landscape, including, some of the Democratic infighting and primaries like we have right here in Michigan with Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens and other places across the country, because you're watching things all over and commenting about this on your YouTube channel.
Well, I think the 30,000 foot view always has to be focused on the thing that is driving Donald Trump craziest when you call it out. You can look at what he's about to do with Senator John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, two people who call out the corruption. And I think that is the main thing. The people who speak best about the corruption and who are able to bring it into your day-to-day life are the people who are going to be the most successful. And I think that's the reason why you see success of the more progressive candidates right now, kind of decrying the Democratic Party, coupling itself up still with corporate donors. It's why progressives and DSA have been successful, and people who are willing to go after the corruption and talk about how it is actually playing out in your everyday life are having the most success. And obviously that drives Donald Trump the craziest. It's why he's so upset with Ossoff. It's why he's upset with the progressives. And it's why they're seeing electoral success in primaries. But the corruption is the big thing to me, because it also plays into the other part of the administration that I find not to be getting enough attention, which is Donald Trump's very clear and obvious cognitive decline. Now, J.D. Vance did this funny thing where he tried to defend all of Donald Trump's stock trading, the insider trading, the corruptions, the government contracts being handed out, when he said that, Trump doesn't have a Robinhood account that he's always on in the Oval Office, saying that, Trump isn't just doing it himself, which made very clear that there's a whole apparatus around him in the White House to carry this out. We know what the purpose of being in Donald Trump's government is. It is to enrich yourself. And the people who come to Donald Trump's government with favors or gold trophies or McDonald's hamburgers or whatever it may be are ultimately just looking to make a buck. So I think the theme of this presidency and the theme of any successful Democratic campaign is talking about corporate interest and decoupling them from government. And I think that does have people excited because it's working out in the places that it's being practiced. New York is certainly one of them. It seems like a utopia compared to the rest of our country. But I think that's what people see the most is this anxiety and animosity towards corruption in government that has played out more than ever before with Donald Trump.
Yeah. One thing that I've been trying to wrap my head around and try to have some debates with some people who have a slightly different viewpoint than I do on this election year and the success of candidates like, let's say, Mondami and others like that is the one size fits all approach, separating the messages that get people enthused versus what plays in the five boroughs or in the city of Los Angeles versus a competitive congressional district or in Michigan or Iowa or a U.S. Senate race in Ohio or Georgia. Your thoughts on trying to thread that needle.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, maybe a DSA candidate won't have the most success, maybe in like, I don't know, rural Iowa. We're yet to test that out. We'll see how it works. For the person who's having a lot of success in Iowa right now, Rob Sand ran maybe my favorite ad of the entire cycle, where he gave no indication of whether or not he was a Republican or a Democrat, but ran this great ad in which he was talking about, in my past work and statewide elected office, I put politicians who spent your money the wrong way in jail, kind of like satiating this American bloodlust for punishment for those who do wrong in our government. His whole thing is like, I think that politicians should go to jail when they break the law. And that's what I'm going to want to do. He wasn't necessarily specific with who those people are or what laws were broken. It was just a broader, you waste money, you hurt people, you get locked up. And I think that saying there is nothing holding me back from accountability that you want. There's no establishment in the way. There's no corporation in the way. All that I want to do is just deliver for you in a way that hasn't happened in the past is just the framework of any message. Like there's no difference with Mamdani saying that he's going to freeze the rent and won't allow, private equity donations to stand in the way of him doing so from Rob Sand saying, we're going to lock people up if they've broken our laws. It's the same. Nothing encumbers me, although that's what held back the politics of the past. That is the message that is ultimately being delivered, is that government didn't work before because there were these middlemen. I will take them away. They do not burden me. Now let me cook. And I think that's the message that kind of lands no matter what way you want to present it. But I think this idea that, you can be, I don't want to use the word necessarily moderate, because maybe that just kind of fits into the buckets that are kind of played out. But like you gotta fight for something if you want to be a quote unquote fighter, because that term gets thrown around a lot. But you have to be advocating on something, on behalf of something.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
So, Jack, you just hinted at this. You can connect this corruption, corporate corruption, and so forth, to people's existing economic anxieties, because that's what the data is telling us. It's what we hear anecdotally, whether it's gas prices, groceries, whatever it is, enormous economic stress and anxiety. And you can, kind of tie that back to the corporate corruption you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think that the best economic message is one that diagnoses a problem that someone doesn't necessarily understand why it's so bad, or knows it's bad but doesn't have an explanation for it, and then fit it into a very simple villain, right? Something that you can talk about with a villain that is easy to consume, and a solution that you can play a game of telephone with. Like, not all of our political advertising can go through radio or digital or TV. You have to have some expectation that either the campaign message that you're able to deliver, like Zohran Mamdani did, we're going to make the buses fast and free, freeze the rent, child care for all. That was the line that he delivered at the end of every single rally, during every single rally, any campaign event that happened. And it's no different than, Trump saying, okay, no new wars, or, build the wall was kind of this suspension of your disbelief just a little bit enough to believe that was the solution to the problem. So I think that's what you kind of have to be after, something that paints a very clear and easy villain, and maybe gives, I don't want to call it a stupid solution, because a lot of these solutions work, but something that's fairly easily digestible, or like makes sense as a good villain, is something to clear out.
Well, this sounds a lot like what populists have done in this country for centuries, frankly, right? Back in the 19th century, you went to the farmers in Michigan or anywhere in the country and you said, look, it's the grain elevators, it's the railroads, it's these big corporations, these monopolies that are exploiting you. That's why you're not making money as a farmer. So, you adjust the villain depending on the audience you're talking to and address their concerns. Is that a fair review
Yeah,
of that?
it's the same. It's the same with calling out an Epstein class. Like, I think the goal is to kind of give people their own leeway to have a class of the wealthy, the elite, the whatever phrase you want to put on it, and then say we are going to take care of that, or we're going to have these people less involved in our politics. Yeah, it's just a new framework of populism that obviously worked for Trump. I think that there's never been a quicker case of nostalgia than Trump 2024. It's weren't things so much better when I was president? It's like, no, they weren't. And it's this funny thing where, you see people who think that, Obama was responsible for, 2007 and 2008. It's like, well, he was elected in 2008. It's like, well, no. He was sworn in 2009. And just because Joe Biden won the 2020 election doesn't mean 2020 was on him. But Trump relied upon this nostalgia that's born out of our increasingly short attention spans more than any other presidential candidate in history. Like, when Reagan was doing Make America Great Again, it was hearkening back decades. When Trump was doing it, it was a shorter amount of decades. And then when Trump version 3 was doing it, it was a few years ago. So it's that smaller attention span, what was in the past, and I think also the kind of the populist villain.
And so what's going to happen going forward? I mean, this message works. Mondami gets elected in New York. From your perspective, has he been able to deliver on those
Yes.
promises? Because I think the risk is, right, that if the Democrats or DSA or whoever people are that get elected, these populists don't deliver, then it's just going to come back on them. So what's going on from that perspective?
I think Zoran Mamdani is a uniquely talented politician. And, when I met him and did my first interview with him when he was polling at 3%, because I was at school in New York when he was running for office, and I followed his campaign since it launched. Even then, he was just this incredibly charismatic, charming, thoughtful figure. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is the guy. But I think what Zoran benefits from is that as the mayor of New York, he has a capacity as an executive that any run of the mill senator or congressperson or even the mayor of LA doesn't have the same type of power that Mamdani has. He's got a big ass budget and he can kind of do what he wants with it. And he's made investments where he needs to. And he's had a lot of success working with Albany and working with Hochul because he has actually used his political movement in the capital that he has. So I think that he's delivered. They're working on speeding up the bus lanes. They talked about Zoran did this announcement when he was talking about the 5 minutes, the 6 minutes, the 7 to 8 minutes that you'll save because we're speeding up these buses is going to amount to 2 days worth of travel at the end of the year or at the end of 2 years. And he's just making things very tangible for people. And it was the same thing with the potholes. It's pothole politics. Like, look, a thing is fixed. And they always make big events out of it. They do a great job with their communications, but they are delivering. Freezing the rent for 2 years for 1 million tenants was delivering. It was one of the best videos that I've seen in a long time was this woman talking about, no amount of SSRIs or therapy could relieve my anxiety like knowing my rent's going to be frozen for 2 years could. And I think what he's doing is getting the trust in government to manifest itself through his actions, which then gives him more trust to do more big things. And I think that's what's been so particularly special about his time as mayor.
It seems to me, though, it's going to be more challenging for somebody who's a member of Congress or a legislator because they don't have that kind of authority. What have you seen going on in that area with folks who've gotten elected using this kind of message?
Well, I just think that, there's an element of this all where, I think that there are a lot of Democrats who will say, well, we have nothing in Washington. We control nothing. But it is a little weird to be an elected representative in the House or the Senate and kind of play that powerless game. I just think that people are looking more at the intra-Democratic Party fights than they are maybe how you're standing up to Trump. And if you're going to stand up to Trump, really the best thing you can do is separate yourselves from the people who put him in power. So not taking money from foreign lobbies or from Palantir or from other corporate donors is kind of the best thing that people can do at this point to separate themselves from Trump. But then the accountability is just like the willingness to break things. I think Newsom did this with Prop 50. I think that's why he's, seen such a huge bump in the polls and has kept it for 2028. Is just the willingness to say, okay, let's not do things the way that we did before, kind of the strongly worded letters joke. I think that is the expectation that people have, that you're willing to break things, that you're willing to stand in the way, that you're willing to cause problems to put, the sand in the gears of Trump. And it's a bunch of little things and they add up. You just kind of have to message why they're adding up, I think, for people to believe you.
When Biden had the trifecta, I was often said on social media that I'm glad the Republicans don't control Washington. I just wish the Democrats did, because they didn't exercise that kind of control, which kind of leads into where I'm interested in. And I don't mean to pigeonhole you as just like the Gen Z expert or anything like that. But when we look at the 2024 election, and we very noticeably saw a fall off in enthusiasm and participation from voters under 30. What's your take right now on the prospect for November and enthusiasm for participation from not just necessarily young voters, but voters who are feeling that economic anxiety and are frustrated with what they're watching happen around them, which is apparently nobody in Washington really trying to deal with the pressures of affordability.
Yeah, I think that Democrats hopefully have realized now that they lose to the couch when they lose, that they're not ceding ground on being, hawkish enough or, border hawkish enough, or I don't know. The deficit is an interesting conversation right now with my generation. I think maybe some deficit hawking could be interesting, and maybe something that people would get a little on board with, considering how existential that feels to our future. What I'll say about Gen Z is that this idea that it's a permanently lost generation to conservatism, I always thought was just kind of people take hunting and trying to get like the biggest reaction. I don't think that's true. There's a nice slice of the pie, unfortunately, though, of my generation that are even more conservative and extreme than, their parents are. If you look at the difference between, Gen Z men who think, a woman's role is in the home versus boomer men, there's a higher percentage of Gen Z, which is wild. But that doesn't mean that there's a whole generation that you can't win. There just are those extremes that I could talk about for hours why that's the case. But I think that the presence of figures like Mamdani and more progressive candidates is helpful. I just think that you have to have the big structural changing ideas for anyone to believe that anything's going to be different. Again, it is an American attention span thing that we're at in this point, where it is a swing back and forth between I hate the current government, I hate the current president. It happens like that. People don't give you a lot of time. I think it's being seen in the UK right now, and they have a much easier way of just like kind of booting out their current leader. But it's going to be a period of dissatisfaction. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bunch of one-term presidents in a row, unless people are willing to just fundamentally break and change things and say, hey, I'm breaking things. You got to give me a moment here. But unless you do that, I just don't think it's possible. Everyone should be running against Washington right now. Like, if you're not running against Washington and saying everything's broken and we need to change everything fundamentally, then you're losing, because it's just politicians are more unpopular than they've ever been. So I don't know why you just wouldn't run against any version of anything that you can call the establishment.
Well, I was just thinking about establishment when you said that word. Is you probably can't find two people who would be considered more establishment than Mark and myself, and not just in Democratic circles. I mean, we've been decades on the scene here, but also I think there's I don't know, that word is taken on a pejorative. There seems to be kind of this rejection of anything that isn't new or outside. Anybody who's been elected before to something seems to be like a disqualification that they have to overcome with a wide segment of the voters, that people are looking to disrupt, but sometimes the best disruption manipulation can take place from somebody who knows how the system works in forming alliances and coalitions within that.
Yeah, I just think back to that 2016 Trump line with Hillary Clinton on the debate stage when he was talking about the fact that she had quote unquote bad experience. So, there's this very inexperienced person who wants to break a bunch of things, channeling the resentments of Americans broadly in a specific coalition that, of course, moved away from Hillary Clinton. Trump won more of those people, got them off the couch, kind of got voters who don't really pay attention to always turn out for him. And I think that's the nature of things right now, is that just everyone sees politics is so broken that why would you want to trust anyone who's kind of already been in it? And there are, merits and dismerits to that. But, there are also a lot of people who have kind of come out of nowhere to have a lot of success with their fresh take, but that doesn't mean that they haven't had, previous political experience or organizing experience. Maybe people are just looking for a different pathway to get there. But I think the establishment as a word, as a catch-all, is just beneficial because people are looking for catch-all words that make sense to them to explain everything away, because they just don't know why everything is so broken. There are not a lot of explanations that I think make sense to people. But there are easy catch-all words and phrases and boogeymen that I think Democrats should rely on more. I think talking about private equity all the time is a genius idea. I think talking about mass surveillance, especially with the prevalence of ICE and flock cameras that people hate, is something that you should be doing. Just kind of attaching the tangible everyday problems that you feel to boogeymen that are aware to everyone, but they don't necessarily know what their effects are. I think if you ask the average American what private equity is or what it does, they wouldn't have an easy time explaining. But if you ask them their feelings, they'd probably say pretty bad, and there's too much of it. They don't need to know what it is. They need to know that it's bad and it doesn't feel good, and someone's going to legislate it away. I just think that's how we should capture imagination right now, by creating messaging that's like a game of telephone. If you tell someone in your political message that you are going after private equity, it's a lot easier to communicate that to your friend who's maybe politically disengaged than one of the many plans that Elizabeth Warren offered up during the 2020 primary. It's more difficult to distill. So I think that's, for better or worse, what Democratic messaging should look like right now. Do the actual policy work. Maybe don't talk about it as much in detail. People don't need to know. But I'm interested in y'all's take on what's happening on Michigan and in Michigan on the ground.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's talk about that, because there's two big races, big statewide races. The Republican nomination for governor, which is a complete MAGA shit show with people tripping over themselves trying to figure out who can hump Trump's shin the most. He's endorsed, Congressman John James, but we've got a guy spending tens of millions of dollars, doesn't care about the endorsement, still out there. And then we've got the race where I know a lot of focus is for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate, now narrowed down to a two-way race between Congresswoman Haley Stevens and Abdul El Sayed. I'm interested to hear your look from outside of Michigan, and then we, Mark and I can, chime in with our views on it as well.
I think the view outside has just kind of been the ad spend for Stevens. And I think people are now starting to talk about, her reliance on outside spending as a potential liability for the general if she's not able to raise for herself. But I think that's just kind of been the conversation is, who is and is not picking candidates. Obviously what happened in Maine was such a topic of conversation, but, I think the establishment hurt itself by jumping in that race too early. Janet Mills is an unpopular governor in Maine, and I think what's happened with ICE in the state since then has not made her any more popular. But I think when the establishment, when Schumer and Gillibrand and the lot jump in and kind of put a finger on the scale, you're not likely to see a competitive primary play out. And I think that's kind of how we got in that situation with just two candidates. You had the person who was, kind of hailing themselves as fighting back against Schumer. And then you had Mills, who was never going to stand a chance. I think her early fundraising numbers and low polls kind of showed that. But this is what's happening with Al-Sayed and Stevens. Is I think that the polling has been tight. I see polls where he's up 10 points and then a poll where she's up 7. So I don't necessarily have a read on it. I just think the outside spend is kind of the conversation, that is the thing that people are focused on. just the amount of money that is pouring in. And also, it's not a bad campaign strategy to have clips of Barack Obama saying nice things about you and then playing them like he's endorsed you, but it's a little disingenuous. It's not bad politics, though. It's just a little disingenuous from Haley Stevens.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Well,
that's
Bernie
one thing
Sanders did the same thing, did he not, Jack?
But I'm not saying it makes you necessarily a bad person. It's just, it's just tough.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen
Abdul.
so much of the online chatter about that. It's kind of the same. I've seen the reaction to Lindsey Graham's sister being appointed. Like, can you believe it? Yes, I can believe it, because caretakers are appointed.
That's what happens
When you have a popular figure like Obama saying wonderful things like, "Oh, Haley Stevens did a great job rescuing the auto industry," they're going to use that. There's nothing, I don't think, disingenuous about that. It certainly implies endorsement, but it doesn't say endorsement. Yeah, that's politics, folks.
I think the outside spend conversation, of course, does have to do a lot with the fact that Israel is such a topic of conversation amongst Democrats right now, and the Congresswoman was on the wrong side of a vote, at least within the party, where there was 102 Democrats who voted on Massey's amendment to cut that $3.3 billion out of a funding package, and that she was one of the 98 or 99 who voted to keep it. And so I think that just internal polling of the party would show that Abdul al-Sayed sits on at least the popular issue within the party, and I think broadly on this. But it also is a little difficult for someone to say that the left is too obsessed with or speaks about Israel too much, when it's mostly because so much money is being spent by this foreign lobby. I don't think Abdul al-Sayed would want to make the Israeli government the biggest topic of his campaign, and I don't think he has. He's mostly talked about spending generally by corporations, but when all that money is coming against you, you want to make it clear why there's so much money being spent against you. And so I think that's the problem that people have, that money is being allocated improperly, that we don't need to spend on bombs and bulldozers rather than hospitals and school and Medicare and anything else. And then the numbers are ridiculous. The fact that we spend so much money on these races and on TV is just appalling. Like, it's gross. And, it's something that myself and other people and progressives and Democrats and whatever you want to call us, and independent media are really trying to make the case for, not just because it's good for the business model of, independent progressive media, but it is wild to give so much money to Sinclair or to Zuck or, other local news station monopolies or giant corporation, the Googles, the Metas, we're giving them so much money, and it's just gross. And I'm not saying that you need to spend it on every person with a couple of Instagram followers who talks about politics, but my God, we're just giving money to the people who we hate. I just can't stand it. It's gross. I think that's also what people feel. Is just like, she's spending $80 million on the primary and I can't eat. Like, this seems a little wild. I don't know. Well, it just pisses people off.
It's been a privilege knowing you these last 6 years, watching you blossom as a political operative, commentator, and influencer, or whatever you want to label yourself. And so, thank you so much for joining us here on A Republic.
And I appreciate you both having me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack.
That's our time for this week. Our thanks to Jack Cocciarella for his insights into the political wars of 2026 and Trump's fixation on 2020 and 2028.
A reminder to our audio listeners to check out our YouTube channel. Help us expand the podcast universe by subscribing to the channel. It's free, there's no obligation, and we promise we won't use your information to bombard you with those spam emails.
If the Republic is still standing, Mark and I will be back next week. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.